This is Eric Humphrey, and along with Dwight Simler, we've just completed this book, Growth, Modernity, and the Nations of Wealth, that deals with the vexing question of how the West became rich. And we're starting to give some talks now, and we've gotten this question a couple of times, which is a great question, and that is, this purports to be a book about modernity, and yet it starts 7,000 years in the past with the introduction of agriculture in Europe, and ends 200 years in about the mid-19th century before the present. So it falls short of modernity. So what's going on here? Book about modernity that lands short? So I want to justify in this discussion is why we took this approach, why we thought we had to go back that far. It's a fair question. And it stems from Dwight's experience as a Soviet studies major, and then also working in the constitutions of the newly independent countries of Eastern Europe, and then my own experience in developmental economics, living in Africa, Asia, and Southeast Asia, and East Asia, and seeing how we've tried to export modernity and how it hasn't worked very well. And we think this stems from the view that we haven't really taken seriously state formation and that's role as an economic problem in solving problems. So we're trying to export institutions without the underlying state. So when this doesn't work, we then just surrender to the mess of history. But just like rich people don't have problems with money because they have money, modern people don't have problems with states because they already have coherent states. So that's why this book takes this long view of looking how modern states ended up developing. So we don't run into problems like Vietnam, where we couldn't spot a coherent state, or like Iraq and Afghanistan, where there was no there. There was no coherent state to receive these modern institutions. So everything became an occasion for corruption. So I want to give you a taste of how our concepts are going to work. The modern state arose and solved a pretty fundamental problem, and that is how to decentralize power and be a state at the same time. So how would we apply these concepts in this book to, say, a modern problem? So consider the very vexing problem right now. Why can't Russia learn? This is now our third iteration in the last, say, 150 years of a hostile form of Russia. The first one, of course, was Tsarist Russia. And that didn't stand out very much because everyone else was doing the imperial thing back then. At least the Russians, unlike the British and the French, were doing it contiguously around themselves. Then we had communist Russia after that. And that Russia looked very different. It looked like the wave of the future and not something way behind. And it fooled most of the Western intellects who were enamored with it. And now we have yet another kind of hostile Russia that's still groping for a rationale, a much more indigenous, civilizational rationale, Neo-Byzantine Orthodox state, whatever. We don't know exactly what it is. But what I want to focus on here with the concepts of the book is once is an occurrence, twice is a coincidence, but thrice is a pattern. So what is that pattern? Well, this imperial pattern that we want to spot over the noise of history, the noise and clatter and epiphenomena of history, is a general phenomena that we can spot and that this book tries to outline. That is, we're trying to give you a theory of gravity and not a description of a falling rock, a general treatment. And here's what that general treatment is. Russia is an imperial form, very typical of the world before the 18th century, trapped in the modern world looking for a new rationale, groping out. So it's the same empire, different day. That's why these three hostile iterations. So our various ways of explaining this identity crisis of Russia are not very good. Say, it must be realpolitik. Russia needs Ukraine because it's part of their traditional sphere of interest. But we don't talk that way about Germany needing Poland as its national sphere of influence because there's no Nazi regime. We don't talk about Spain needing Belgium because it's in national interest of the Habsburg regime. So what interests are very much dependent upon the regimes in power and how they earn their money and stick to life. A successful Russia is just going to find more interests. But similarly, our attempt to export institutions have not worked well in Russia too. So we bring kind of that Chicago school influence to look at these problems more on their economic basis. And that is, don't listen to people's lips, watch their wallets. When we talk about the material realities of state formation, how are we trying to solve real problems? Modernity solved, or modern states rather, solved a very important problem. How do we decentralize power and still be a coherent state, enable people to objectify their creativity in society? And it turns out, if you ask the question this way, there's one thing that's way more difficult than loving your neighbor, and that's making a loan to your neighbor. And that's the issue that the modern state has solved, not perfectly, but relatively well, learning how to trust people. The new type of modern state, which Russia isn't, is relatively good at decentralizing power. But it's a middle-sized identity. It's not a selfish individualistic identity. It's not an altruistic humanity identity like you might find in communism, but some sort of middle-shaped identity that acts as a credit report to other people. Because to make a loan, we need more than a generic statement about your humanity or your selfish individuality. And that's the real point. So the new state is behaving more like an economic firm, using that Coase theorem here to help us solve this problem. So now you contrast this new modern state that arose only 300 years or so ago, probably less, with a typical empire builder when we treat in the basic framework in chapter 2. Economically speaking, this empire gets big by being rich. It doesn't transform the world, it just gets more of it and gains its rents from that. So ancient Rome and ancient China got rich by expanding, not by transforming the world. These orders are very conservative, and it's very dangerous. A good Roman always knew that you don't harass the masses, tamper with their family members, daughters, don't steal their cattle, and don't mock the peasants' gods. We moderns are pretty good about the first part, but we really try and bring the masses up to speed, and that annoys them. But the reason why these empires are so conservative and so wed to conservatism, like the present Russian state is going into, is that to hold reality, you don't want it to be slippery. You don't want it to be transforming and changing. These states are not good at change. They're very fragile. So what does this long view of history that you might find in the book have to do with Russia? Well, Russia is an imperial form trapped naked in modernity and groping for a rationale. So don't pay attention to the czarist one identity of a hostile Russia, or the no, we're really the wave of the future Russia, the communist Russia, or now this new one, no, we're just defending our civilization from Western corruptions on the periphery. What we really see here is an imperial form trapped with a modern problem. Imperial and modern do not mix. And that's why Russia can't learn. It can't do the modern act of decentralizing power to hunt down those new efficiencies, to risk a lot and be a state at the same time. Anyone who does it is going to run into the Gorbachev problem, and that is you open up society and you break up and release all these republics onto the world. Well, if you do that again with modern institutions, Russia will most likely break up again. It can't decentralize that power, so we'll be in the Gorbachevian dilemma. So there's that problem. Our institutions make it more fragile. So then we get trapped in these Russian patterns of oscillating between Western catch-up and imperial consolidation. This we get from looking at the underlying structure of how the Russian state is made. And that's what makes it so difficult for Russia to learn on our third iteration of hostile Russia. Thanks.